I'm going to chair instead of Amichai Magen this session, I don't need, of course, to present myself. I was presented before, and several logistical matters before we start. First of all, Dr. Elizabeth Shepard-Selam is not going to present her paper. She's not here. So the session 3 devoted to populism and radical right will have 2 speakers as in the program, Dr. Toby Greene and Dr. Daniel Wajner. And then we are going to invite Mrs. Oria Levy of session 4 initially to speak and complete the session so that we will have afterwards a very long lunch break, given that in session 4 there was another paper of Dr. Marsha Don Harpas, which who decided to drop the presentation, and therefore session 4 is not taking place. What we are doing, I repeat, is for those who hear me, having a session of 3 papers, 2 of them corresponding to populism and radical right, and then the paper of Detached Childhood by Mrs. Oria Levy. This means that we will have first a discussion of the 2 papers and then a discussion of the last paper separately, and then proceed to the lunch break. I want to say that we are very lucky to have 2 top experts on questions related to populism, both in Europe and in the rest of the world. Our first speaker is Toby Greene, who is going to speak on international political worldviews of the radical right, and he himself will tell us the details. Toby Greene is a lecturer at the Department of Political Studies at Bar-Ilan University, and his research and teaching focuses on foreign policy decision-making, European foreign policy, and the international politics of the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian arena. And in 2019-20, he was a Marie Curie, prestigious Marie Curie Fellowship at Queen Mary University of London, researching the foreign policy worldviews of rising populist parties in Britain, France, and Germany. So please, 15 minutes, not more.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope people can hear me here in the room and out there in the.
Just one minute, Toby. Mute yourself. Unmute. You were unmuted, Toby?
I believe I'm unmuted. Can I be heard? I hope so.
If you're unmuted.
Okay, I'm about to share my screen. I hope that's going to work also.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I think I have now. Okay, brilliant. So thank you, Alfred, very much. And this is still very much work in progress, so I very much welcome your feedback. There is, of course, a huge amount of interest, sort of endless interest, really, in rising radical right politics globally, in Europe, and indeed in Western Europe, including an interest in increasing interest in the attitudes of radical right political actors towards foreign policy and towards international politics. We saw the very considerable impact that Donald Trump in the United States had on US foreign policy. But even in opposition in Europe, radical right political parties can have a considerable impact. We saw in the case of the UK how UKIP, only ever achieving 1 or 2 parliamentary seats, nonetheless played a significant role in bringing about the Brexit referendum. So I I'm exploring the foreign policy worldviews of radical right parties, and in this case, in this presentation in France and Germany, opposition parties, of course. And these are, France and Germany, of course, are the two most powerful and important foreign policy actors in the European Union, and the two states most central to the European integration project itself, both obviously sitting at the absolute core of the project of European integration. So whilst radical right parties in those countries have significant barriers to entering government, they can still significantly impact on discourse and have the potential to undermine unity of purpose and identity in those countries that is required for coherent long-term foreign policy commitments. So what are my research questions in this project? I'm just going to skip over these quotes here and jump to my research questions. To what extent do European radical right party elites share a substantive common worldview regarding international politics? To what extent are there varieties of elite opinion on international politics within and between European radical right parties? And to what extent is their worldview shaped by thick nativist or nationalist ideology, and to what extent by populism? And on that last question, I just want to unpack that a little bit, referring to a couple of recent trends in the literature on populism and nationalism. There has been a tendency often to conflate nationalism or nativism, which is an exclusivist ethno-cultural nationalism, which is at the core of contemporary radical right ideology, with populism. But there is an increasing trend in the populism literature to distinguish these two ideological features. So nationalism framing the national community in opposition to outsiders, and populism framing the national community or the native community in opposition to corrupt elites. And in a recent paper, Erin Jen suggests, I'm quoting here, nationalism by itself is likely to yield more limited foreign policy revisionism than nationalism combined with populism. And a second trend in the literature, the populism literature generally treats populism as a binary category. Parties or leaders are classified as being either populist or not, but there is an increasing trend to try and be more fine-grained and recognize that there are degrees of populism, and perhaps many, if not most, politicians will perhaps engage in some populist, sort of pro-people and anti-elite sounding rhetoric at some point. But, and here I'm quoting Rudwin Delange and Van der Berg, when they write, a politician who sends out many populist messages can be classified as more populist than a politician who sends out few such messages. So in short, these trends in the research suggest that we should think of populist ideology as something separate from nationalist ideology, even if they do very often go together. And we should think of populist ideology or ideas perhaps being present in various degrees rather than as a binary category. So turning back to my research, I did interviews with elite representatives or elected representatives of the Front National or Rassemblement National as it is now in France, and the AfD in Germany, to explore their international political worldviews. In short, what did I expect to find? In essence, I expect to find kind of commonality, relatively unified values within these parties and between these parties that are, after all, part of the same ideological family. They're partners in the Identity and Democracy Group in the European Parliament, for example. And indeed, we do find many commonalities across and within these parties. There are many themes, and I'm not going to go into all of them in detail, but just to very, very quickly summarize some of the main ones. The individuals, elected representatives of these parties that I interviewed, from Rassemblement National in France, from AfD in Germany, they believe in the essential character of the ethno-cultural nation, and that's rooted in perceptions of history, of the native culture, of traditional values, of their nation also being embedded within a wider European or Judeo-Christian civilization. And they're motivated by the sense that that ethno-cultural nation is being eclipsed or erased by a range of processes that includes demographic change, mass immigration, especially of Muslims, a general left shift they perceive in the political center of gravity, leaving a vacuum on the right, an excessive focus, they believe, on historic shame in the national culture, and that relates, of course, to the Nazi period in the German case, but also in the French case to the colonial period. An excessive dependency on other nations, whether it's the US for defense or China for essential goods or infrastructure. And of course, European integration is a key part of this perceived national eclipse as well. And the drivers of these threats are both domestic and global in their view. They see liberalism, both internationally and nationally, as a kind of a threatening movement. They see mainstream foreign policy as a driver of this process, especially excessive alignment with the US. Middle East instability is another global source of this, of of this process, and it's, it's a spillover from the Middle East in terms of uncontrolled migration and violence into Europe. The growing economic power of China and its trade and economic practices. Turkey is often a target of concern for many reasons. Also, Sunni Gulf states, much more so than Iran, interestingly, are perceived to be a source of threat for their promotion of puritanical forms of Islam in Europe. And they have a vision of a sovereignist or anti-globalist world order directed at preventing this disappearance of the ethno-cultural nation. And it includes an approach to foreign policy based on a very narrow definition of the national interest. They're very skeptical of using national resources to promote international order or stability without a very clear direct implication for the national interest. This concept of sovereignism and opposition to supranational or international agencies having power over the nation state, a sort of principled non-interventionism, Euroscepticism, obviously protectionism of national industries, and a sort of pro-Trump attitude, by which I really mean pro any international actor that seems to share their sovereignist or anti-globalist worldview. There are, of course, differences between the cases, the French and German cases that I'm studying here, that are shaped by national culture, and I'll just mention briefly a couple of them. So, for example, in the French case, I found with the interviews with representatives of Rassemblement National, a much stronger sense of a French global role than you find in the case of the AFD, and I put that down to the rootedness of these parties within their own national political culture. And another example with respect to NATO, Rassemblement National has a very strongly anti-NATO policy for France leaving NATO, whereas the AFD does not have such a strong anti-NATO policy, though there are a range of views on NATO. And that, again, I root in the differences of national political culture in which these parties are operating in. But what I really want to focus on here is a common pattern of variation within each party. And I see variations in the depth and extent of the populist element of the ideology among the individuals within the parties, and also variation in the extent of their foreign policy revisionism. So in the data I'm going to present here, I measure populist ideology or identify it primarily in terms of conspiracy theory. So the extent to which the interviewees interpret events in terms of hidden elite conspiracies or plots, I see that as a marker of the extent to which anti-elite populist ideas shape their worldview, as aside from the nativist or nationalist ideology, which is shared across all of these party elites. I'm going to present profiles from 4 interviews, 2 from the AFD and 2 from Rassemblement National, with respect to the extent of populist or conspiratorial thinking in their general worldview, and in terms of some key foreign policy issues. Okay, so the first individual that I'm referring to here, a veteran, senior, former MEP representing Front National, or now Rassemblement National. In terms of his general worldview, he says, I'm afraid that Marine Le Pen doesn't care as much as I do to this problem, contrary to her father, but I think we are witnessing what might become the disappearance of Western people. So you see immediately that he identifies more with the, let's say, with the generation of Jean-Marie Le Pen than the Marine Le Pen leadership of Rassemblement National as it is today. And he says very openly, there is a plot. There are economic, political, ideological interests in destroying national independence and even the sense of our nation. So a kind of strong element of belief in a kind of a hidden elite plot. What is exactly, he says, the share of human activities in climate change? This has still to be proved. So he has a kind of climate change denial or skepticism regarding man-made climate change. And with respect to Russian international role, the fact that the Russians interfere with elections in America, is democracy in America so weak that Russia can influence it? It's unbelievable. So a kind of a few markers of a kind of strongly populist worldview there. In terms of foreign policy, this individual very strongly anti-intervention, even opposed really French participation in intervention against ISIS in Syria. Also a strong perception of Russia as a civilizational kin state. So overall, an elite conspiracy populist worldview, quite influential in how this individual interprets events, and quite a strongly revisionist foreign policy attitude. The second example from Front National, a current MEP representing Front National or Rassemblement National. I joined the Front National because Marine Le Pen had replaced her father, and I understood immediately by listening to her that she was basically very close to Gaullism. So you see that he identifies or positions himself coming as much more from kind of center ground political thinking. He rejected liberal immigration policies, this individual, but did not speak of elite plots trying to mix races in Europe or promote replacement or that kind of thing. He does not deny climate change, And though he does accuse the US of fictitious accusations of Russian election interference. And he says, it would be interesting to know if the CIA did not overthrow a democratically elected government in Ukraine. So that kind of elite conspiracy thinking is not totally absent for this individual either. He advocates a kind of balanced, what he calls Gaullist foreign policy. He says we must consider Russia as a partner and treat it with dignity, but at the same time, we should be wary of it. So he seeks very much a kind of balanced position between great powers, and he does not absolutely rule out international intervention. He supported, for example, the French intervention in Mali. Turning to the AfD. So the first individual here, AfD Bundestag member, in terms of his general worldview, I joined, there is a nice YouTube video, he says, of Nicolas Sarkozy saying very clearly at his party conference in 2008, the agenda of the 21st century is to mix races to make the world more peaceful. And he said very clearly, if it cannot be done peacefully, then we will do it by force. So he believes that there is a transnational elite plot, similarly to kind of mixed races in Europe. He rejects man-made climate change, absolutely. The climate is always changing, he says, but the climate is not man-made, so he denies man-made climate change. With regard to the Ukrainian conflict, it is not unknown that the US has spent almost $5 billion to ensure exactly these incidents take place on the Maidan. So he's committed to the idea that the revolution in Ukraine 2014 was US orchestrated. In terms of foreign policy, he seeks to shift Germany away from dependence on the US. In NATO, he has a relatively positive attitude towards Putin and relations with Russia, and very, very strongly anti-interventionist. So like the first case that I discussed, quite strongly populist in his thinking, quite strongly revisionist in his foreign policy. Certainly compared to my final example, another AfD, a leader, a leading representative of the AfD in one of the German state parliaments. In terms of his worldview, he says we have a permanent move to the left side by the former Conservative Party, so they created a vacuum, and this was the reason why the AfD was founded. He rejects liberal immigrationist policies, but he also does not speak of elite plots. He rejects mainstream climate change policies, but he does not deny man-made climate change. And in terms of foreign policy, he is much more mainstream. He's pro-NATO. He himself was a retired military officer who spent his career in the NATO structure. So he's pro-NATO defensive alliance. He's willing to consider German participation in overseas military intervention in some cases. In terms of Russia's role in narrative, he actually mocks some of his own colleagues in his own party. He says the people from Eastern Germany who suffered 40 years from communism, from socialism, they have the best view of Russia. It's like Stockholm syndrome. I think some people admire Putin. On the other hand, if you're realistic, you see he's a dictator. So again, this individual populist ideology seems less present than for his colleague, and indeed, his foreign policy outlook is more mainstream. So there seems a common core of attitudes across and within these parties that presents a clear challenge, an alternative to mainstream liberal internationalism. There's also a variety across the two cases, which are shaped by their national political cultures. But perhaps most interesting is the common pattern of variation within the cases. Seems to me that politicians who display strongly populist ideologies as well as nativist ideology do have more radical foreign policy outlooks. And two concluding points that this suggests to me. One, I think it does support the idea that we should treat populist ideology as being present as a matter of degree rather than a binary category. And from the perspective of the study of the radical right, there's, I think, analytical value in distinguishing between the nationalist or nativist elements of the ideology and the populist part, albeit even if they do very often go together. And for those concerned about threats to the liberal international order and EU integration from radical right actors, perhaps there is value to distinguishing between the populist and conspiratorial ideas that are relatively easy to dismiss from the nativist or nationalist ideas which represent perhaps a more substantive challenge, which may require a more substantive ideological response. Thank you very much.
Okay. Unmute. Yeah, thank you very much for finishing on time. I didn't have even the need to, I had written 5 minutes, so you did it better. So now we are having a second paper by Daniel Wajner, a young rising star at the Department of International Relations of the Hebrew University, where he's a lecturer. He did his postdoc both at the Freie Universität of Berlin And also here at the Leonard Davis Institute for International Relations, he has already published widely in very important peer-reviewed journals like the International Studies Quarterly, Foreign Policy Analysis, and Diplomacy and Statecraft. I am eager to hear what he has to tell us about the populist impact on regional integration, comparing Europe and Latin America from where he hails. Okay, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Alfred, for that presentation. I accept the young issue, the star. It's, well, we are here in the European Union, lots of stars. Just a minute. Here. Okay. Great. And it's great also to speak after, can you hear me well? Okay, fine. And it's great to speak after Toby's presentation that I think in a way complement each other and also suggest the possibility of a nice discussion. Okay, so this is a very rough, I would say, working paper, let's say, on populism, regional integration, and effects, potentially the effects of COVID-19. So just to contextualize, we are speaking about the global rise of populism. Populism was always there, political science, etc. But in a way, it came to us, to the international relations arena and regional arena since the last decade. And we are researching on it much more. So is this really a global phenomenon? I won't enter into this discussion, but in particular, we were discussing in the last 5 years about what transnational populism means for foreign policy. For example, the kind of presentation we have here, trade, international courts or international organizations in general terms, global media, communications, grand strategy, that means security aspects, and as we are doing here, regional integration. But in fact, most of those studies were about or sources or patterns. That means how did populism arrive to the international arena, or how do populists mold their foreign policies? How do populists how do populists, let's say, approach international trade? But we have researched much less on the effects, the impact. So this was part of my, in a way, my postdoc projects on researching on the drivers and patterns, but also on the effects. And if there's an understanding in the last, I would say, 2 years of research, is the need for theorization regarding the measuring impact on specific issues. Let's say, okay, that is the populist foreign policy. Okay, does it affect? And in which way and why? So this is the question for this specific research. How does populism affect regional integration? Trying to search for impact. I'm also working on security. I'm also trying to assess, measure, evaluate implications for security aspects. But here it's a paper on regional integration. So I want to enter here into the theorization of populism in a way. Also, Toby presents some discussions whether nationalism and populism it's the same or not. It should be separated. So there's people considering this as a sort of socioeconomic policy or style or ideology. Discourse. Just I will only refer to my view of populism as a sort of strategy, a macro strategy of legitimation, is the way it's what you use in strategical terms to accumulating power. It's the kind of narrative, the kind of discourse you use, sometimes the kind of style you use for accumulating power. And in a way, the thing is, if there's something that is ideology there or ideational, it's this struggle, antagonistic struggle between peoples and elites. So you have the people, you have the elites, and you try to make them confront each other. Okay, so what I tried here is to theorize 4 different kind of approaches to regional integration. So populist, in a way, and we are referring here to populist leaders, but then when they come to power, they can have 4 different approaches or strategies towards regional integration. The first one is, I call it regionalism, a regionalism. That means the means used there are indifference, national protectionism. In that case, the actor, the populist actor, cares much more about let's say, defending the national thing. And in a way, he doesn't avoid delegation, in particular supranational delegation. And the ends of that strategy is trying to reduce political cost and stop supranationalism. This is the first. The second one is anti-regionalism. In that case, the populists strongly criticize the RO, the regional organization. Particularly, you can see there the backlash against the bureaucracies. In that case, the elites that we saw before about the populism are the transnational elites, Brussels, Frankfurt, okay, or the IMF, in case international organization, but here we are speaking about regional integration. And they try to develop different kind of ad hoc anti-RO alliances, but still not institutional. And the ends of this strategy are undermining the ROs and a sort of what Toby referred before about revisionism, a sort of geopolitical revisionism. We have a third strategy that was used also by populists, that is pro-regionalism. That time I embrace these regionalist processes, and then you show positive regionalist stances, positions, and you play the RO game. I mean, you play the different procedures of the organization. And the ends is to conquist and to reform. I mean, you try in a sort of try-hard, you try to enter into the organization to change it from within. And you have a fourth strategy from populists that is para-regionalism. So you create para-diplomacy networks. You try to create different regionalist networks, sometimes official, I mean, sometimes from the state, sometimes inside the state, different NGOs, INGOs, etc., or associations. And then you develop a sort of a la carte, what's other around called a la carte regionalism. So different, a menu of regionalism that this, of course, it's a way of overlapping regionalism, and the ends are to compete with that regionalist processes and to create a sort of regionalist fatigue. Oh, there are too much organizations in the region. There's too much regionalist process. Oh, okay, let's return to our own issues. So we can say that in a way, these are the 4 strategies. We can say that different populist actors use different strategies. That may be, let's say, a strategy of research. That was my first idea in this regard. That you can see, okay, you have Brexit. Brexit is a typical case of anti-regionalism from populists. You have, let's say, the Syriza's position in Greece. Okay, sometimes it was a regionalism, sometimes anti-regionalism. There were 2 options. What I developed, in fact, is understanding that is a sort of life cycle. The populists use all of these or will use all of these strategies if you give them time. And there's a kind of process. And at least that what I saw from Latin American and European cases, or at least two cases that I will try to present. That in fact, you start by, you are focused on your own national issues. The region is something that you refer to, but in a sort of an indifference. Then when you see a crisis, you use it for strategic purposes. So you become anti-RO. In a certain point, you understand that it's not enough. It's not successful enough. So you try to get in and to conquest it from within. And so regionalism. And then you understand that that is not enough because the procedures or the institutions are strong enough, or it's not the success you wanted. And then you develop the para-regionalism. The regionalist fatigue returns to the issue of, okay, our regionalism. Everyone in his own country. And so the whole regional thing goes to where it started. So this is a case that I have researched a bit more, let's say, than the second case, that is from Latin America, from Venezuela, what we call Chavismo Madurismo, or Chavismo in general terms, that in the 90s, I mean, when Chavez started, he was not an anti-US, and not an anti-European, and not an anti, let's say, regional integration in South America and Americas in general. He has a very pragmatic, nationalistic approach toward the Andean community that Venezuela was part of, Organization of the American States. Even when he came to power, it was something that the neoliberals were in Latin America at that moment. It was something, okay, it was something appropriate, let's say, to take a distance. After the crisis in the 2000s, economic crisis, financial crisis, it also became a regional crisis. A very anti-FTAA's stances were applied by Chavez, and Chavismo in general terms, his allies. And he created ALBA. But ALBA as a sort of, it was not an institutionalized thing, a sort of anti the free trade of agreement that the US was trying to support, and also anti-Mercosur and anti the regional organizations. When that was not enough, they stopped FTAA, but Mercosur continued, and he went from the Andean community. It was not enough. So he tried to conquer Mercosur. So he made a lot of efforts to enter into Mercosur and to change it from within. And it took him 6 years, despite all this, the influence of Venezuela in that moment, petrodollars, paying from the oil revenues. It took him 6 years to convince the countries to approve it. And it was not successful. He understands from the beginning that it will not succeed at the end, even let's say, if he enters. And then he moved to a strategy of para-regionalism, trying to create CASA, then became the UNASUR, then CELAC, all what we call the Nuestra American Regional Organization. A different kind of narrative, a different kind of regional integration. Let's do something different, okay? And after that fatigue, we have what we have today, or in the last decade, let's say, that is distance. It's indifference in a way of fatigue. We have something very similar with Hungary. I took Hungary, not because it's an area I know too much, but it gave me a longitudinal perspective, let's say, to see along the years. We can say the same about Fidesz, about Orban. At the beginning, when he was prime minister and then in the opposition, he was a soft Eurosceptic, but not something, even he support the entrance of Hungary to the European Union. He made a lot of progress in that direction. In particular, after 2014, we can see, or the experts on Hungarian politics, they see the anti-European Union and that Eurosceptic position due to the different crises, 3 different crises at that moment. The migration crisis, the crisis between regarding Nord Stream, if you remember, the German-Russian agreement, he saw that as he was, at least from what I understand, that was something very important there. And also different kind of crisis he has in terms with bilateral countries in the European Union. Then they move, in particular after the global rise of populism in international arena, etc., to influence through different right-wing populist alliances in the European Parliament, in different, let's say, different bodies inside the European Union, and also outside it, in particular when they saw that it was not enough. So they moved to institutionalize the Visegrad. It was obviously it was before, but we start to see there the strong, let's say, institutional building and cooperation with Russia. That was something different there. And this was a sort of para-diplomacy, and also some things, not state-to-state relations, but inside the state. And in a way, it stopped in the last years, we can say, and returned to before. So what about COVID here? COVID is a kind of crisis, and we saw that crisis there affect a lot. So I would just ask questions. I don't have too much time to refer, but is it possible that the return of state borders with COVID-19 it would be a push towards a regional stance that everyone, each country by itself? Is it possible that the socio-economic crisis, in fact, will encourage anti-regionalism, as we saw in the different cases? Is it possible that the idea that the fact that regional powers have paid for collective costs? I saw that in Germany. I mean, the fact that even if the vaccine was German, they didn't receive the vaccine first, and a lot of, let's say, of course, that Germany and some countries in Europe paid, not at all, but let's say relatively, maybe that legitimizes pro-regionalism, the return to Europe, and the different strategy, or the fact that there was a sort of sub-regional measures there against COVID. So is that reinforcing para-regionalism? Those are questions for you. Those are questions also for me that I'm trying to research. I have different further research strategies, but for the moment, I would love to hear more your feedback, and if you have comments or questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am unmuted.
No.
Okay. I don't know if among the public here there is a question, and I don't see in Zoom anybody asking for. Huh? Oh yeah, also. Okay. So you are first. I mean, Maya, please.
Just on mute. Okay, so thank you both for your presentations. Toby, I have the Photological question, and Daniel, I have several questions. How do you choose your interviewees, and how many interviewees are you intending to continue until you think that that would be sort of a valid take? And it was very interesting, thank you. And Daniel, I still have to think how your model plays into Israel-EU relations, because I think there is something into it under Netanyahu, as you know, some can define it as a populist government as well, and the attitudes of like Chavez, like an outlier player from Mercosur, how he can conceive Israel vis-a-vis the EU when it wants to stop or thwart the EU decisions against Israel. So using Hungary, for example, to veto decisions at the Foreign Affairs Council would be, I still need to think about it with your model, but there's something into it. And is it a circle, or is it under certain conditions you see X, and under certain conditions you see Y, or does it really have to be a circle? Did you find only circles, or could it be another direction? And one note with Fidesz, and Gosha, can you help me out? It was only last year that the EPP threw out that part of Polish representative, was it Hungary representative? From the EPP question? Yeah, it was only last year, was it? It was a year or a year and a half ago. So within the European Parliament itself, the House of the European democracy, the Fidesz country, political party was inside the EPP, and it took them, they had to give up, I don't remember how MEPs they had, but it was quite considerable number, and they had to give up those members of European Parliament and to shrink themselves in order to push this party, which is Eurosceptic, anti-democratic, illiberal, and does not resemble the EPP in any way. So I think you'd have to look it up also, just because there's a clash there.
Only March this year.
March this year, yeah.
Okay, please mute. Maya, mute.
Yep.
Here, Odette, you want to be here or?
Whatever's good.
No, because people want to.
The nearest computer that.
Okay.
Mhm.
With survey box.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, Toby, I only came in the middle, so I can't really ask a question. But Daniel, was very interesting. There is in Polybius, book 6. There's a term which is called anacyclosis, which basically means the transformations of regimes in a circle. So I think in terms of theoretical background, will be extremely interesting for you to check there, because it shows how basically regimes, I don't know if some of you know this, but it shows how basically regimes already in a Greek form, sort of ancient Greek form, are actually going in circles, which is really, really interesting.
Sorry, someone came.
Yeah. Okay, so that is one point. But there, what you see is that the model is very sort of strict, and here I'm just wondering about the cases and the boundaries between them. So sort of, and maybe you said it and I missed, but maybe jumps from one sort of circle, inner circle, to another, which would appear in other cases. For instance, I'm thinking now on Boris Johnson. I mean, if you can even call him a populist leader, I'm not sure. Yeah, but there you see, I think, a sort of coming back already to the first circle, like going back to EU relations. So after the Brexit, you only see early signs for this, but this is sort of the circle is completed. So basically, I'm talking about the boundaries in between them. I think Polybius, in terms of theoretical background for the article, for the essay, would be extremely, extremely important for you. And very, very interesting. But thank you for this. It was really good.
From what I see, Gomel, Giorgio, no. Do you want to?
Yeah.
To ask a question? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So
no, I have a. Yeah. Can you hear me? Just a minute. Let's see.
Giorgio, you can ask your question. You are on mute. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah. Yeah, it is working, right? You can hear me. Yeah. I have a question for Toby Greene. You made a very interesting taxonomy, and the country where I come from, Italy, is quite interesting because the distinction between nationalism and populism is very important in our case, because we have had for years a strong and now dwindling populist party, which is not right-wing, the five-star movement. It wouldn't be right-wing or ethno-nationalist according to your taxonomy. These are things that you don't really find in the two countries that you mentioned, Germany and France, where there is a conflation actually between ethno-nationalism and right-wing populism. And one distinguishing factor in the Italian case is the insistence on direct democracy. It's not just populism in the sense of anti-elite, anti-establishment, and the idea that the people is a homogeneous thing irrespective of social classes, etc., etc. But this, emphasis on direct democracy against representative democracy. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think you are hearing me. Thank you, Giorgio. We have a final question, unless we have a final question by my dear colleague, Chairman of the Department of International Relations, Yoram Haftel.
Thank you, and sorry for coming in late. I heard part of your representation, Toby, so I don't have a question, but I have a question for Daniel. And that was really interesting, the different categories. But I like the idea of the same party or the same leader having different approaches. But then it was hard for me to imagine that they all have all of them together, even if different times. How the same people moved from pro-integration to anti-integration and back. So I was first wondering whether you need to distinguish between tactics and strategies, or whether it's a kind of a deeper approach, and what you described is really different tactics to get to the same point, and whether you mix them a little bit. And then I guess the second, what was my second question is whether you actually need to look at different types of regionalism, right? Because you have kind of regionalism, anti or pro and power and so on, but different regionalism mean different things, right? And I probably talked about it before, but I was wondering whether you need to kind of unpack this concept of regionalism and say, you perhaps you pro some type of regionalism, but anti a different type of regionalism. See my point? That's it.
Okay, I think in the order of the presentations, we are offering to Toby to react first, and then to Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike, for your question on methodology. Methodologically, it's a very, very challenging. It's a very challenging methodology to do elite interviews, particularly with radical right parties, for all kinds of reasons, and I could speak about that at length for many different reasons. How did I choose? I sought to interview politicians as senior as I could access, basically, with who I knew had some interest in international politics, and I contacted a great many. And of course, the reality is that the sample is in some sense self-selecting, because it's those that are willing to be interviewed and be spoken to. I interviewed 5 elected representatives from the AFD, 3 from the Rassemblement National Front National. I also interviewed about a dozen UKIP politicians. I didn't really speak about them because who cares about UKIP anymore, but you would actually find very similar patterns of commonality and internal differences, variations within the UKIP case. Also, it's a qualitative research project, so I don't aspire to quantitative standards of validity, but I do believe that there is enough in my data to show interesting patterns of both commonality and difference that can contribute to the field and be built on with other qualitative and indeed quantitative studies. In terms of Giorgio, thank you for your contribution, your comment on Italy, and I agree Italy is a very interesting case, one that I'd like to study at some point in the future. But I would just refer to other political parties, both in France, in Germany, and in the UK. You have left-wing radical left parties that have populist features also. I think the case I know best, which is the case of Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, but of course you have Die Linke in Germany, you have radical left parties in France as well. So we do also see that the differentiation between populist and nationalist elements in that respect.
Yeah. Good. Now, Daniel, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for the very challenging and provoking questions, at least for me. Some of them I would say that are methodological. In fact, that I also discussed them a lot, and I also shared my discussion whether to go for, let's say, the 4 options and then try to refer to under which conditions. And I agree that it's much easier, in fact. So it's not so strict. It's not so, as you said, I mean, it's more flexible the way you can treat them. But I think that at least when I was thinking about that, I said, well, the Venezuelan case is exactly this. I mean, it's a cycle. And from there, I want to see if there's another case. I mean, in a sort of, inductive, tentative examination. So yes, I would agree that I mean, those are two different strategies. A scholar can go for the two, and so these are two papers. I tend to think that the idea of a cycle, it's very interesting. I mean, if we can check that all those four options appear there and in different kinds of regionalism, I agree with you, Yoram. I mean, we discussed this. Could it be considered the same Mercosur than CELAC? Two different kinds of regionalism. One focus on economics, the other focus on political things or security things. It's like comparing. So yes, maybe I would need to think, but I think that at the end, and this refers to the idea of tactics and strategies. At the end, all these kind of different, all these kinds of regionalism have similar goals. So I agree that I need to differentiate between tactics, that for me was maybe the means there, and strategies and goals. Maybe I would need to highlight this in the text, and also the fact that there are different kinds of regionalism. I would try to look at that text. I would try to look at the text. I agree. I mean, I need to, if I'm theorizing about the cycle, I need to ground it on theory. I will look at this. There are other kinds of norm cycle, etc. I was thinking about. Also, there's the other was you also do the same sort of realization. Okay, I will look at this. And last but not least, the Israeli question. I would say that first of all, it's not the same kind of regionalism. I mean, I'm here speaking about regional integration and not about regional cooperation. And from that point of view, I would always say that I'm not sure that Israel is interested in regional integration. I hope someday it would be interesting. But I think it's very interesting in a sort of regional cooperation, etc. So, but I will need to think whether there is some kind of pattern also from countries that are that they don't have those kinds of regional integrations because they are not part of a region. We were discussing this with Dani Miodonic, I mean, which is a region of Israel. You ask also in a. And I will finish with it in the poll of Midwin, which is Israel's region, and the Mediterranean or the Europe or the Middle East, etc. Different Israelis think different about which is the let's say Israel's in region and how does Israel need to insert in the world. So I need to think more about whether this applies to Israel. In any case, thank you very much for the comments. And see you in the.
I thank the two speakers very much, and now we are going to switch to the last speaker of what should be another session, technically speaking, because it has not a direct relationship to populism. I have the honor to introduce Oria Levy. Oria Levy is on Zoom, and she is a PhD candidate at the Hebrew University in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. Her dissertation focuses on detached childhood, overall life satisfaction among child and young adult immigrants in Europe, under the supervision of Professor Jonas Schalknes and Professor Uzi Rebhon. Oriya is also at the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics, head of social welfare, crime and law, and responsible for the development of national statistics on people with disabilities in Israel. I welcome very much, as a member of our association, someone working at the Central Bureau of Statistics. This is a premiere for us, and we encourage more people of the government or working for the government at very high levels to become members. So take an example, those who are seeing this. So without much ado, I let you take the floor from where you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'll just share the presentation. Okay. The study I'll present today focuses on life satisfaction of immigrant children and young adults aged 15 till 25 across 30 European countries by comparing their overall life satisfaction with that of native peers and investigating differences in overall life satisfaction among immigrant children and young adults by continent of origin. From now on, instead of saying all the time overall life satisfaction, just say it in short, OLS, please. Several central aspects in this study are, first, is the direct assessment of the children's OLS rather than external data or parents' assessment. Second, it is the comparison of immigrant children and young adults from different continents on the one hand, and of non-immigrant children and young adults on the other. And third, the role of anti-immigrant discrimination in child immigrant life satisfaction. Immigration across international borders and adjustment to a new country is a long and stressful process that involves shifts in many domains of life, including the social, the economic, and the cultural. Previous studies have been concerned with the subjective well-being of immigrants compared to natives, especially in Europe, where a growing share of the population is of origin, background, and ethnic minority extraction. These studies have proposed that immigrants in Europe have significantly lower levels of life satisfaction than natives, and that this gap does not disappear by younger generations or with age. Alongside growing research on the subject, it is found that the parents are generally oblivious to how children spend their free time, their subjective feelings, and their worries, especially among adolescents. To best answer such questions, it is imperative to view children as the primary source of the information about their own well-being by measuring children's subjective perceptions of the world and soliciting their insights about their experiences. Guided by the literature on immigrants, children, and young adults OLS, and that on discrimination against immigrants, three main hypotheses are proposed. First, OLS is likely to be lower among immigrant children who migrated when they were between the ages 0 till 14 and young adults than among native peers, who particularly salient among young adult immigrants. The second is immigrants' OLS is influenced by their continent of origin. And the third hypothesis is that high levels of discrimination in the host country are negatively associated with immigrants' OLS. The data for the study harvested from 8 rounds of the European Social Survey, the ESS. The ESS collects information from persons aged 15 or older on a wide range of subjects. For the current study, I focus on children and young adults aged 15 till 25, which results in an initial sample of approximately 48,000 individuals divided between 3,000 immigrants and about 45,000 native-born in 30 European countries. The question used to measure the dependent variable, which is the overall life satisfaction, is, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life in a whole nowadays? This variable is measured on an 11-point scale ranging from 0, extremely dissatisfied, till 10, extremely satisfied. The explanatory variables were clustered into three major blocks: immigration factors, socio-demographic characteristics, and discrimination. Nativity status distinguishes between native-born and foreign-born. Age at immigration is decomposed into two categories of 0 till 14 children, and 15 till 25, which are called young adults. The continent of origin classifies immigrants into three categories of Africa, Asia, and other, with the latter including North America, South America, the Caribbean, and Australia. Veterancy is the number of years that immigrants has lived in the host country according to 5 intervals of 1 year or less, 1 till 5 years, 6 till 10 years, 11 till 20 years, and 20 years and above. Religiosity, and another very important variable is the level of discrimination, is that in order to reveal the impact of discrimination in the host country on overall life satisfaction of immigrant children and young adults, I incorporated a macro variable which reflects the extent of acceptance of immigrants of different racial or ethnic backgrounds by the host population of ages 25 and above. Turning to descriptive findings. The figure below shows the average of overall life satisfaction among native-born and immigrants by continent of origin and the age at immigration. We can see that the native-born are slightly more satisfied with life than our immigrants And we can also see the differences among immigrants themselves by continent of origin and age at immigration. When immigrants are grouped by continent of origin and age at immigration, it is found that young adult immigrants, ages 15 till 25, from Africa are least satisfied with life, lower than the oldest of young adult immigrants from Asia or other continents. Another finding is that immigrant children from Africa, Asia, and others are on average more satisfied with life than our young adult immigrants from the same continent of birth. Immigrant children from Asia are least satisfied with life. Their all is lower than that of immigrant children from Africa or other areas. Next, I'll present the estimates from ordinary least square linear regression models that predicts the OLS as a function of nativity status and age of migration. I present only the coefficients of the independent variables which were statistically significant. We can see in model 1, the left model over here, that it includes only the nativity status and age at migration, veterancy, and variables indicating ESS round. Among immigrants, being a young adult who migrated at ages 15 till 25, the OLS decreases even more than it does among immigrant children as compared with natives. According to the simulation framework, differences between native and the immigrants in life satisfaction levels should diminish with the length of stay in the country, as demonstrated in many studies. In the first year of migration, there seems to be higher satisfactory scores. It can be seen in model 1 that the relationship between overall life satisfaction and length of stay in the country is significantly positive. Immigrants up to their first year have the highest level of life satisfaction in the host country. As time in the new country passes, life satisfaction decreases. Model 2 and 3, in the middle and in the right, we can see introduce the familial and socio-demographic characteristics, respectively. With the expectation of gender, all variables are positively significant associated with OLS. Father and mother's educational attainment, household size, and level of religiosity. Next, Still using the linear regression, now we see only child and young adults immigrants that are analyzed and examined for differences in their OLS by continent of origin and age at immigration. Here we see that all young adults immigrants 15 to 25 are found to be less satisfied with life than the omitted category of immigrant children 0 to 14 from other continents. And young adult immigrants from Africa, followed by those from Asia, are the least satisfied with life. Child immigrants from Asia are found to be less satisfied with life than immigrant children from other continents. The same like the first model also I showed you, that immigrants up to their first year were the happier, most satisfied with life. Now speak about the discrimination. To what extent do different levels of discrimination against immigrant children and young adults affect their OLS? To answer this question, you can see in table 4, by adding the level of discrimination to the third model we see before, shows that the impact of level of discrimination on life satisfaction is significantly negative. You can see here about 3.683, it decreases the OLS, overall life satisfaction. Few studies, to summarize all this data, we can see that few studies analyze children's OLS after immigration, least of all from their subjective point of view. Recognizing the effect of immigration on this important population is crucial for countries with high rates of immigration, because immigrants are likely to become integral and growing parts of society as we see it nowadays. The findings of the foregoing multivariate analysis on ESS data show that OLS is significantly lower among child and young adults immigrants than among native peers. The effect is barely attenuated after adjusting for variable socio-demographic characteristics, whereas OLS is lower among all immigrants than among natives. It is even lower among young adults immigrants. Likewise, immigrants' continent of origin is strongly associated with their OLS. It is much lower among young adults immigrants from Africa and Asia than among peers from other continents. As noted, socioeconomic, cultural, and political differences among immigrant children from different continents of origin may have an important effect on life satisfaction. The differences remain after controlling for socioeconomic background and religiosity. Thus, it can be assumed that the lower OLS is affected among other factors by the large cultural differences between Africa and Asia and the host countries in Europe. Moreover, it is not surprising that the OLS of young adult immigrants from Africa and Asia is the lowest. Young adult immigrants are more exposed to and affected by the culture of their origin country than are immigrant children, and therefore may have a greater cultural gap to overcome. High levels of discrimination in the host country have a strong negative effect on the life satisfaction of all immigrants, regardless of continent of origin. Epidemiologists and social psychologists find a direct relation between perceived discrimination and mental health, social stress, or even depression, especially among young ethnic and racial minorities. This may explain the strong, significant effect reported above. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a question from Zoom from Professor Gili Drori. I'm going to read it for you, and Oriya, you will try to answer.
Okay.
She says, first, for clarification, the age of immigrant is at time of immigration. That's first. Second, do you account for historic era when immigration occurred? And also allowing attention to time, have you validated these patterns across generations? 3, have you calculated for gap in opportunities between source and estimation, therefore giving body to the cross-regional differences that your models confirm? Can you answer?
Alfred, please, I will answer the first question, and next, if it will be...
Just a second. Moment.
Alfred, I said I will answer the first question, and then please, if you can ask again, because there were many questions and I couldn't write them all. Okay, the first questions about the age of immigration. I actually calculated the year of survey and age of, and
Oriya, can you stop sharing? Sorry, Oriya?
Yes.
Can you stop sharing so we can see you?
Sure. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry to disrupt.
Okay. So about the age of immigration, that I divided the age of immigration to 2 groups. The population is people aged 15 till 25 of the survey, and to see the effect of the overall life satisfaction on their of immigration on their overall life satisfaction, I divided this population into 2 groups of time of immigration, when they were kids, 0 till 14, and 15 till 25. Alfred?
I assume that you are answering all the questions that I posed you. I am assuming. Okay, we have one more question here by Yoram Haftel, sitting by me. Moment.
Can you hear me? Hi. So that was very interesting. I have 3 quick questions. First, how did you measure discrimination? It wasn't very clear to me. Second, so maybe I missed it, but did you take into account the destination country? So if you look at 30 European countries, whether an immigrant arrived in Denmark or Romania may make a difference. I would think so. I was wondering whether even controlling for discrimination, whether the destination country might make a difference. And the first question, I guess, was wondering about your interpretation about the difference between the younger and the older immigrants. You say it's about maybe it's easier for children to integrate into society, but maybe in general you would expect children who have no worries of work or providing in general to have less life satisfaction. So maybe that's just a general pattern, nothing that is special to immigrants. That's it.
Okay.
If you allow me, I will add my question. You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is less scientific, but more based on hearsay. And this is that we are told traditionally that there is an age to migrate and there are ages where you don't migrate. And one of the ages we are supposed to migrate because you are freer, you don't have family obligations, is when you are from 18 or say 20 to 25. And that's, and in general, we were told that your life satisfaction would be big. Maybe I am mixing with people that were doing Aliyah, but I mean, I understand very well your argument that children when they are moving very young, they adapt very quickly. But then, for example, we are told moving children when they are adolescents is a big problem. And then it's easier afterwards. So your division of groups, I think from 0 to 15 and then 15 to 25, that's how you divide it, seems to me a little unfortunate, I would say, because I would have taken 0, 10, 10, 20, and then 20, 25, or say something like this, because it's easier to move when you are 20 to 25, it seems to me, than when you are from 10 to 20, because you are not a child and you are not an adult. And you have your friends. We know it, those who are academics, that children from 15, 16 don't want to go with their parents to a sabbatical because they have their life there, which is unbelievable because I, as a child, I would have said, I go for sabbatical, whatever, but most of them don't want. So could you elaborate on this one?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll start to answer all your questions. Alfred, I have to say that
we don't hear it.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. About the first question of discrimination, how I analyze this, I actually took a question that asks us about discrimination of the foreign population who comes to the country, and I asked it only, and I looked only for the people aged 25 and above, who usually have their own opinion and they don't change it every day or, like, say, quickly. And I saw their answers, and per country and per round of the survey, and their answers, I just put it on the immigrant children and young adults per country and round, so that we can see that actually it's a macro variable that see the opinion of the non-immigrant population for the foreign population. This is about how I calculate the macro variable of discrimination. As you said, it's true that children has less worries than adults, and that's why we can see also in studies and also here that there are more, the overall life satisfaction is higher than that of older group of ages of, as I say, young adults of 15 till 25 who migrated when they were 15 till 25. And they usually cope with stress, and they cope better with the new area because they found more easily friends, and it's more easier for them to cope with problems. The more adult people, like adolescents or young adults, they have more worries, as you said, Alfred, because I can quote one sentence that I really felt that I connect with, is that they need to cope with the life inside and the life outside. The life inside is the family, and the life outside is all the new society they need to cope with. It is very interesting what you said about the ages, maybe to investigate ages of 19, 20 to 25 and put the 15 as still adolescents. I may check it also. It is very interesting what you said. I didn't saw about this gap of age groups. And I just want to say that in this study, I put Israel and Turkey outside of the countries that the children migrated to, because Israel and Turkey usually act different, and it's a different population than the Europe population, and it acts differently because to Israel we usually do Aliyah. It's different reasons why, so that's one point. And the other point is that we see in a lot of studies that usually the actually, I won't say anymore because I already summarized it before. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it was very, very interesting discussion. And I think we have finished our work for this morning. And at time, more or less, it's 2 o'clock, and we are going to reconvene here at 4 to hear our keynote speaker with an introduction by Gisela Dax. And maybe Maya wants to say a couple of words of organization.
I invite you all to lunch at the Microsoft Cafeteria. It's not vegetarian, but there are always vegetarian options to find.
We can't hear you, Maya. We can't hear you.
This morning, so you're most welcome to join us. But please come with us so we can sit together.
Can they eat? No.